All right, welcome back to Organisms. This demo, now that you feel totally comfortable with live investigations, crickets and the African frogs, I'm sure you will have no problems at all wondering about worms. For this investigation, just earthworms will do. I get the worms from my backyard. I've got two young boys at home who love to help look for worms anyway when they're fishing, so you can find these in your own backyard or even around your school. Or of course you could just buy them probably at a bait shop or gas station if it's that time of year also. This investigation, oh, by the way, I do want to introduce and show you, you are getting several books in your supplies. Diary of a Worm, of course, is one of those. And the great thing about that is I'm sure you've heard from your districts like we have, with the gaps we're trying to fill from last year. If we're cutting science and social studies, we're really going to have to work hard to try to integrate. So what better opportunity you have to read a great book like this and then use scientific investigations with it. So the question you're going to be answering today and wondering about worms is a reaction to touch. And that may very well gross some of your kids out, or maybe even yourself, and reaction to moisture. So get back on there, that one's leaving. Each group, or however you set up your tables in your classroom, they need 5 worms for this activity. 5 living, wiggling, moving worms, because you want to see their reactions, the kids' reactions and the worms' reactions. For the moisture investigation, you're going to need 1 dry paper towel and 1 wet paper towel. This works great on the trays. And you're going to be getting plenty of those trays to use in your classroom too. So go ahead and have them set up on the tray. I don't like for the kids to go back and forth wetting paper towels themselves, so a spray bottle will work well for that, or simply just wet them yourself and keep them in a bin ready to go for your classes. Oh, I lost another one. Sorry, they're very wiggly. 5 worms. So the question is, for the first part, do earthworms prefer moist or dry areas? Again, like with the other investigations, you want to go ahead and poll the class first, see what they think, have some suggestions for reasons why they believe one or the other. You've got your paper towels ready side by side. Make sure they're right up against each other. You're going to take 2 worms for each side, 2 for the dry. 1, 2. 2 for the wet. Oh, here's a biggie. 1 and 2, and then the 5th worm is going to go right in the middle, right in the center. You're watching for 5 minutes. So again, I know Grace already talked to you about timers, using those, or having your Promethean board, go ahead and have that classroom timer go in. 1 has already left right from the middle. Maybe you've already seen them crawl over to the wet side. This is going to happen in your class too. If they leave the paper towel, just gently push them back on the paper towel they just left. You don't have to start them all the way back to the middle or anything. Just get them back where they were. So as your kids are making observations while that timer is going on, you want to notice how maybe quickly the ones on the wet paper towel are moving. Some are moving faster than others. Do they seem to be feeling their way around and not liking what they feel and looking for something different instead? Another thing I would suggest is if you've got, there you go. You want to have backup worms, backup crickets, backup, not because you're planning on them not surviving the investigation, but sometimes they're just not as active as others. So you really want a good reaction for the kids to be able to see. Maybe if one worm's not moving at all, replace it with one that's a little more lively, because that's more fun, for the kids too, so they can actually see it doing something. All right, so after the 5 minutes, they're going to record on their tally sheet how many worms are on the dry towel, how many are on the moist towel or the wet towel. Again, hopefully time permits that you can do an additional 5 minutes, because with science experiments, you don't want to just run one trial. You want to do it several times to make sure that outcome is going to repeat itself. So you start all over. You put them exactly back, 2 on the wet, 2 on the dry, 1 in the middle, another 5 minutes. If you're pushed for time, I don't see any reason why you couldn't shorten those trial periods down, maybe 2 minutes 2 minutes, 2 minutes instead. But there is room here on your data sheet to run 3 of those trials. Again, more measurement in science, moving math into science, which, it's one of the gaps your district's going to tell you to go back and fill in from last year when the kids were out. Here's a great opportunity to do averages in science. So you're going to add up the number of worms, you're going to divide by the number of trials, and then record it there at the bottom. Questions to answer following that would be, how did the earthworms respond? They all went to the dry towel, or they all went to the moist towel. I'll tell you right now that as I've been talking, more of them are on the dry towel than the wet towel, but that's not usually the case of what I see. Usually I see them move to the moisture side, and if you've seen worms on a dry sidewalk, you know why, right? And your kids will have that experience too. And then you want to talk about, is that a behavior that was learned, or is that a behavior that was inherited for those worms to prefer a moist environment? The second part of that investigation, and this wouldn't have to be done on the same day, you can, tricky. At least the trays have sides where they don't run off as easily. You could do this the second day as a follow-up activity, reaction to touch. Worms have distinctive parts. They do not have 2 rear ends, as kids think they do, or 2 heads for that matter. And if you want to help them find the difference between the 2, look for the clitellum. It's that thicker swollen band. That's the end closer to the head. And then the anterior, that'd be the head. And then the posterior is the rear end. So use those words with the kids, the posterior, the middle of the worm, and the anterior. On their recording sheet, and you don't need 5 worms for this, but each student or at least partner group would need 1 worm. They're recording what the worm does when it's touched. Again, you want to make sure that with all the animals, you're teaching respect, you're teaching, just polite handling of these creatures. So they're going to be very gentle. They don't want to have a bunch of sanitizer on their hands. Kids are going to ask if they can wear gloves to do experiments like this, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think when they see you holding the worms, handling, they're going to be less afraid. So what you're going to do for this activity is you're going to take one of those worms, and it doesn't need to be in your hand to do this, and just very gently, leave it on the paper towel even, very gently, just touch it. Touch it at its head, see what it does. Touch it in its middle, see what it does, and its posterior, and see what it does. So you're touching 3 different distinct parts of that worm, and then recording what reaction the worm had. Did it retreat? Kids will say it shrank. You're going to see it expand and contract. Did it do nothing? That's certainly a possibility. And then, of course, you can have a discussion about the responses that the worms had. And again, is that a behavior that was learned, or is it a behavior that was inherited for the worm? I will say, worms sometimes can be one of the things that really gross kids out. I don't know if it's the texture of the worm or all the dirt it seems to track with it. But if you yourself are really afraid of worms, that slimy feeling, another great option for this activity is a mealworm. Mealworms are not slimy at all, and it's really great to use later in your lessons for metamorphosis, because the mealworm will become the darkling beetle. And they're cute, they're a little small, and they'll run all over their little hands. And sometimes that's a less, standoffish approach than maybe an earthworm would be. All right, so that is wondering about worms.